Good day, everyone. Welcome to our stakeholder engagement and public consultation with the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee. We will start off shortly with the national anthem and then go into the discussions for today. O God of creation, direct our noble course, guide our leaders right, help our youth
the truth to
to
know,
know,
in love and
in love and
honesty
honesty
to grow, and
and
living just
living
and
just and true,
great
great
lofty
lofty heights attain,
to build a
to
nation
build a
where
nation
peace
where
and
peace
justice
and justice reign. Okay, great. Welcome everyone again. Good to be here once again to one of the stakeholder engagement sessions. My name is Esiri Agbeyi. I'm a partner with PwC Nigeria and also leader of the Family Business Services for PwC Africa. Today, we'll be having a very engaging session as always with the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. And I'll be introducing at this moment the chairman of the committee, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, who leads the committee and will lead the conversations for today. Welcome on board, Taiwo.
Thank you very much, Esiri, and thank you to all our stakeholders. So this is a syndicated session where we try to bring everything together in terms of the engagements we've had with over 17 different groups, making up about 36 different subsectors. The outline that I have for my presentation today is to start with the global context and then bring it back home in terms of what we are trying to do with the Presidential Committee and how we do our work. We will discuss our bold ambitions and the expected outcomes. We'll share with you the progress we've made so far and what else we're working on, and then paint a picture of what success looks like. And then we take questions that you have already provided. We then conclude with our key ask and next steps. So to start with, I think it's always very important to pay attention to what's happening globally because no country is an island. We live in a global community. And because of what happened around 2019, 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic, the world went into a panic. There was a shutdown in many countries, and that affected a lot of people, particularly those who earn a living on a daily basis. As a way of response, many governments just resorted into literally printing money and giving to their citizens to spend. Unfortunately, that policy decision, why it was necessary, led to consequences, including inflation that the world is now dealing with. Inflation in itself is an issue that is always of utmost importance to policymakers because it can fuel social crises as well as increase inequality and poverty. In dealing with that, you would also find many governments would then raise interest rates, tightening policies, both monetary and fiscal in some cases. But that in itself also has implications for growth. If not carefully managed, can actually lead to a recession So what we're seeing now is the outcome of those issues. And we see inflation around the world. We see monetary and fiscal policy tightening, which is now biting in terms of economic growth. In addition to issues around geoeconomic fragmentation, where you have the US sometimes, China going in their different ways. Some countries align with them, some don't align. Actually, we also find countries who are, trying to look inward, sometimes closing their borders, introducing tariffs, and that's what you can easily call deglobalization, which is not good for the world's economy as a whole. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, in one of their forecasts as at the end of October, projected that growth will be slow across the world. And that's not even very different from the projections for 2024, including even in developing countries, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, including Nigeria. It's even worse in places like South Africa. So if you bring it down home, what you would also see is that some reports by the Bureau of Statistics as of 2022 indicated that about 133 million Nigerians live in multidimensional poverty. And I'm sure that if this study is conducted again at this time, that number is likely to have increased, because these were the numbers before first subsidy removal, before Naira flotation, before the prices of goods and services and inflation got to the level where it is today. And what that means is, while we cannot control what happens to the rest of the world, whether Russia will strike Ukraine, whether Israel will have issues in the Gaza, whether there will be anything to do with COVID-19, there are clearly issues that are within our control that we can address. We see economic growth for Nigeria has been quite slow for many years, below population growth rates, therefore adding more to poverty. Inflation is high, even though it's high everywhere in the world. Nigeria's inflation is about 4 times higher than the global average. What that means is there are things that we have to address which are peculiar to us and not to do with the rest of the world. Unemployment rates in terms of decent job remains high, even though statistically unemployment rate is about 4.2%. But if you have a lot of poor people, but yet they are recorded as being employed, it simply means that the kind of jobs that they get is not decent enough to give them the kind of lives that they want. We have low revenue for government, resulting in high public debt, in many cases resulting into overdraft from the central bank, which in itself further adds to the inflationary pressure that we have. Investment is declining. We don't have sufficient investment to grow our economy. There can be no growth without investment, and you cannot have investments without conducive environment, including your policy environment for those investments, including domestic and foreign investment as well. We've seen the increase in the rate of emigration, and these are people leaving the country. While the percentage of people leaving the country is not, the highest. In fact, the rates of people leaving the country or who have left as a percentage of the total population is even lower than the African average and lower than the global average. But what's more important is the reason why those people are leaving. So there are countries where they have a national strategy to send their people abroad. India would be an example. The Philippines would be an example. So people going abroad is not in itself a problem, but if they are leaving because they are frustrated or they don't see hope, then that's an issue to worry about, even if it's only 0.0001%. We've also seen instances where corporates are making decisions to divest. Some of them are leaving, some of them are reducing the scale of their operations in the country. While it may be for different reasons, including their business strategy, which means it would have happened regardless, There are also instances where we can attribute that to the business climate, which is within the control of the government. And you see the reason why our people live in multidimensional poverty here, education, access to health, living standard, including safe drinking water, sanitation, as well as work and security. So this slide just gives more context in terms of the issues we've been dealing with over the past, let's say the past decade, and the trend we've seen in terms of the government budget, how much of that is funded by revenue, how much of that is funded by borrowing from the central bank, and by extension, how much that has contributed to the inflation crisis that we have. Particularly when you look at the inflation of food, inflation of energy, including people who are buying diesel, they easily understand what I'm talking about, as well as for health. So and you would imagine these are the most basic issues for any country, for any people, food, health, and energy. The Nigeria Economy Summit Group conducted a study about 2019, and that was a national tax perception study. And it shows that the tax system reflects a very low tax morale. In other words, the vast majority of the Nigerians don't want to pay their taxes. They do not see anything wrong with evading taxes. Only 17% of Nigerian adults believe that they should pay their taxes correctly and to pay it at the right time to the right authorities. Well, if you interrogate, which was done by asking them, why is it that you do not want to pay your taxes? The number one reason they gave is they do not trust government. And number two reason is we don't get enough for the little that we pay. And number three is even when we want to pay, the process is complex and sometimes corrupt. And when we asked businesses as well, it was just slightly better. Only 31% will pay their taxes. Nearly 70% will rather evade paying their taxes. Interestingly, when we ask the Nigerian people, what should government do for you to start paying your taxes? Their top two rather, is education and health. And that for me gladdens my heart because it shows that despite the level of poverty and hardship, Nigerians are still prioritizing what's most important, which is human capital development, health, and education. When companies and businesses were asked the same questions, their priorities were number one, electricity, and number two, security. And to be honest, whether it's education, health, electricity, and security, I do not think we need any survey to know that these are the basic things that government must provide for the people. So, having said all of these, what is the role of the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee? So this committee was set up by Mr. President, and it was inaugurated on the 8th of August, 2023, with very broad mandate, essentially cutting across three pillars. Pillar one being fiscal governance. How do we manage our finances, spending, borrowing? How do we ensure coordination between monetary, fiscal, and trade policies of government? Proper coordination between the organs and agency of government at the federal level, and also with subnational, in other words, with states, as well as with local governments. Pillar two is revenue transformation, focusing on both tax and non-tax revenue. For non-tax revenue, we're also looking at oil and non-oil, including other natural resources, including government assets, as well as including government interest in enterprises. Number three being economic growth facilitation. Now, this pillar focuses on the fact that at the end of the day, the best way for you to have a decent society and fund government sustainably is to have an economy that is growing, is to have growth that's inclusive and carrying everybody along. And therefore, we're looking at what are those impediments to growth, to trade, to businesses, for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, multinationals, domestic investors. including imports and exports. Some exporters have said to us, just exporting anything from Nigeria is like a nightmare. You have to go through over 20 different regulators with all manners of permits and licenses and approvals, delaying your importation or exportation in the process. So much so that we're aware of exporters who then put their produce or products in vehicles and they drive to neighboring countries to export from there. So these are issues we must address. In terms of what is the fiscal direction for the Nigerian economy, the direction is we want a system that is modern, simple, and adaptive. We want a system that enables growth and allows Nigeria to be competitive within the African region and also globally. In principle, we do not want to tax investment. We do not want to tax capital. We do not want to tax production. Of course, we don't want to tax poverty. And as Mr. President put it, we will not tax seed, we will tax fruit. So what all of these mean is that the Nigerian state wants to take a different direction, which is to enable people to prosper, to enable businesses to grow. And then out of their growth, out of the returns on their investment, out of their productivity, we can then take a share of that by way of taxes, rather than waiting at every post of investment and imposing levies and taxes that make those investments even unviable from the very start. The work of our committee is guided by certain principles. Number one is we operate in the national interest. In other words, we prioritize what's good for Nigeria over and above sectional, regional, groups' interests, or self-interest. Number two is we are data-driven. There's a quote we use very well, which is that in God we trust, all others must bring data. Because if you don't use proper data and evidence for making policies, the outcome will be very different from your aspirations. We focus on impact. It is not about the effort that we put in. We will not celebrate that. We will rather celebrate the outcomes and, more importantly, the impact those outcomes make in the lives of people. We are looking at harmonization and simplification. Things have to be simple. It should not be harder for me to pay taxes than it is to buy pizza, right? It should be easy because paying taxes is already hard anywhere in the world. So the process of paying it should not be even more difficult. We do not plan to introduce new taxes to the extent possible. Only caveat is we're looking at repealing so many taxes, over 50 of them. We're looking at removing them. And therefore, it may become necessary to have a tax that is maybe a harmonized levy, such that the vulcanizer, such as the small business owner, such as the transporter will pay just one tax, so we can have those situations. Other than that, we're not planning to introduce new taxes. We're looking at policies that will facilitate not just growth, but inclusive growth, ensuring that we do not leave anyone behind. Ensuring equity, even within government. Sometimes you see between federal and states, there's inequity. Between state and local government, there's even more inequity. So we think that first and foremost within government, there has to be equity. Follow what the law says, be fair to everyone. And then between the government and the people, on the other hand, there has to be equity in the way we treat ourselves, in the way we treat people who are most vulnerable. And small businesses, for example, that are rarely on the table when policy decisions are being made. And sometimes there's not anyone who is looking at the issues from their lenses. We welcome diversity of views. This is the reason why we're having the stakeholder public consultation, and we're meeting with various groups from farmers to traders to artisans, people with disabilities, Nigerians in the diaspora. We are even particularly interested in the Nigerians in the diaspora. Apart from them sending money to us, they are also Nigerians and they are affected by the things we do. and therefore getting their views in terms of their experiences, where they live and work, what they can share with us is extremely for us priceless. We are looking at ourselves as partnering with the Nigerian people to co-create the solutions to the challenges that we face. And as part of it as well, we have people we call the Friends of Nigeria. So they're not Nigerians, but they are friends of Nigeria, including multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, African Development Bank, and we also have local partners like the civil society such as Budgets, and they are working with us to ensure that what we do is right, to ensure that we are transparent, to ensure so that we benchmark ourselves with the rest of the world in terms of global best practices. And finally is to prioritize. There's always the danger to want to do everything, but in reality you can't, and you shouldn't even attempt to. So we think what is right is to focus on what are those 10% of reforms that will give us 90% of the impact we're looking for. We have bold ambitions because we think that we should not limit ourselves in terms of our aspirations, because, like the saying, that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. We think that we should not start by saying, oh, it's not possible, it's going to be hard. We should just try and let's see how far we can go. So we have ambitions to reduce the over 60 different taxes and levies across local government, state, and federal government to a single digit. In other words, when we are done with our work, we envisage that we'll have less than 10 taxes combined across all 3 levels of government. The tax to GDP ratio today is around 10%. We're looking at moving that to about 18% over the next 2 to 3 years without introducing new taxes. And where we expect to get that from is that there's significant non-compliance, so we close the tax gap. We have issues to do with incentives that are being abused, so we're going to look at rationalizing incentives. There's significant cost of collection and leakages. We'll close that as well. So we think that just by doing the right thing here and there, we can more than double Nigeria's tax revenue without introducing new taxes. And in fact, despite removing and repealing more than maybe 80% of the existing number of taxes that we have. We want to create a fiscal system that is intelligent and therefore trying to control itself. So if, for example, you have landed property in Lagos, you have bank accounts, you go to the mall and you spend a lot of money, you travel abroad for vacation, and then your tax returns shows that either you have no tax returns or you've only paid 10,000 in a whole year. The system is going to be asking you, this is not making sense. If you import goods and you under-declare so that you don't pay duties, and then you file returns and you want to claim deduction with the FRS and you overstate it, the system will also flag it. And that's what is done in many countries using technology. So we want to promote fiscal equity to ensure that there is equity between economic participants to the extent that they're doing similar businesses, and also between the government and the people. We are planning to rewrite all the tax laws, all the major tax laws in Nigeria. We want to rewrite them because many of them are so old, like the Stamp Duty Act is a law of 1939 before our independence. So we think that amending them is not the ideal thing. Let's just rewrite them and make them simple, make them contemporary and fit for purpose. As part of that, we also have plans to even amend the Constitution to address issues around clarity of taxing rights, what revenue should go to what level of government, for what responsibilities they need to discharge. If you remember the dispute around VAT collection, should it be collected by the center? Should it be collected by states? We want to set up the Office of the Tax Ombudsman and Office of Tax Simplification. The major reason being that today, if you're a small business owner and somebody shows up to say you're owing 5 million naira in XYZ taxes you haven't paid, really, what can you do? You don't have the knowledge to defend yourself. You don't have the resources to hire an accountant or a lawyer to defend you. So you either have to beg or you have to fight. And begging could also mean that you have to pay a bribe in the process. And we think this is not fair. And that's not the way we should treat our people. So this Office of the Tax Ombudsman would then intervene to make sure that the right thing is done at time with focus on protecting the taxpayers. We're looking at harmonization, and then part of that is we also feel like today, if you're a small business owner or even a large business owner, even multinational, and somebody says, what are the taxes and levies you're liable to pay in Nigeria? You struggle to know what the lists are because sometimes those lists just increases every day. So some of them are made up as you go along. We've seen transporters who are asked to pay over 50 different levies and taxes just for one trip from the north to the south. We spoke to the Market Traders Association of Nigeria, MATAN, and they said that even people who are selling pure water, they're just fucking pure water. They said they pay 7 tickets every day, and they call them tickets. So why should you pay 7 different taxes every single day just for selling pure water? So we think that we should create some harmony where everything is harmonized. And then we also want to use technology to drive that. There should be a platform where you can go to and find all 36 states of Nigeria, 774 local governments, all government agencies, and the levies and taxes that you need to pay and who needs to pay them and how you pay them. So you can see everything in one place. And we also want to develop model tax codes for states so that even if a state wants to harmonize their taxes and levies, they can just take our standard template and adopt it, or maybe adapt it slightly if they want to have anything peculiar to them. We're looking at digitizing revenue administration. We're working on a project called Data for Tax. This project will pick the intelligence about your income, your savings, your spending, and link them together. So you go to the mall, you go to the cinema, you buy a car, you register it, you buy a property, whatever economic activities you do, even your phone call, the system will pick all of that. On one hand, it will help us to identify the poorest people. You don't need to really go to villages and rural areas or remote areas to find who is poor. If we have this kind of intelligent system, it will tell you who is poor. That was why during COVID, many countries were not asking people around. They just knew from their database who was poor, and they just credited them. Some of it will be mobile money, could be to your bank account. We want to do the same thing in Nigeria. So it will help us identify the poorest people that needs to be protected or who also need conditional cash transfers or other interventions. And then we also identify those who are not so poor and have the ability to pay, but they are not paying, particularly some of the very rich and ultra high net worth individuals, and even a lot of executives and the middle class, and some business owners make a lot of money and they don't pay taxes. We're looking at VAT fiscalization, where the VAT system is also digitized in terms of the invoices that you issue, so that for every transaction that you conduct, the taxman sees a copy almost immediately, therefore preventing evasion. So we're looking at how can we optimize revenue from government assets. So government assets all over the place are in trillions and trillions of naira. But they're not being well managed. Some of them are idle, some of them are suboptimally used. So can we bring all of that together under the Ministry of Finance Incorporated to manage those assets for us, including government interest in enterprises, whether it's NNPC, whether it's NLNG, whether it's refinery. So all those business enterprises, bring them together in terms of the management. And that way we can optimize value for our country. If the value of those assets are 100 trillion and you make just even 10% returns per annum, that's easily 10 trillion naira of revenue that we can make. We're planning to introduce a national tax amnesty in 2024, and that is to ensure that people can plead the past so they can have the confidence to go forward, because going forward, it will not be business as usual in terms of tax evasion. We were looking at fiscal management in terms of, a new national tax policy. The national tax policy we have now was done in 2017. We think it's due for a review. But in addition to that, we're using that opportunity to include policies around spending. So should government build an international worship center when we don't have, roof over primary schools, when you don't have health center with facilities and healthcare personnel, when you don't have road from the farm to the market? Should we be building airports, for example, instead of providing potable, clean water to our people? So should we not prioritize those things that put our people in multidimensional poverty? So those spending policy and borrowing policy would also include this time around in the new national tax revenue, spending and borrowing policy. We want to be able to improve the coordination between monetary and fiscal policy as well as trade, and then develop a national fiscal framework for our country so that we stop referring to the IMF standard that says our debt, to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the world, even though we are struggling to service the debt. So should we not come up with a threshold that is fit for our purpose and reflective of our circumstances? Many countries we are comparing ourselves with, we borrow at, near 0%, but we borrow at double digits. So what should be the budget deficit as a percentage of GDP? How much should you borrow from the central bank as a percentage of your revenue? All those benchmarks, we want to be able to develop it for ourselves, and it to be applicable to federal, state, and local governments to guide our fiscal management. So the outcomes we expect, the image you see on the screen is a self-service terminal that has just been introduced by the South African Revenue Service. And they say this is like a tax office. It can do anything for you apart from paying you tax refunds. Just imagine they're going to put it usually where they find ATMs. So you can just walk to a machine and take care of your tax affairs without having to travel to the tax office or beg someone to give you what you're even entitled to. That means we have a sound fiscal environment that will aid economic growth with fiscal equity, clarity of taxing rights, single-digit taxes across all levels of government, increase in tax to GDP ratio to minimum of Africa average, and integrating revenue functions so that instead of having over 60 MDAs, all chasing revenue, they can then focus on their primary mandate of facilitating economic growth while revenue collection is administered for them and on their behalf using technology. So the people will pay less and government will collect more because you address the inefficiency in the current process. Collaboration and coordination, self-service will be promoted where people can take care of their own affairs right from their devices. And also, we hope that government would then rely less and less on borrowing to finance public spending, and more importantly, to improve the quality of spending of the monies that the Nigerian people pay and our natural resources, income, and to then increase accountability and trust. So what progress have we made? We submitted our first report to Mr. President in October, which we call the Quick Win Report. We are currently in the phase 2 of our work, which is critical reforms. This is the phase where we are rewriting the laws, and the last phase is full implementation and change management. These progress reports we submitted, one thing that is good about our committee is not just to make recommendations, we work with the government to implement our recommendations. So this report that we submitted is at various stages of implementation as we speak. Some of the recommendations are fully implemented. Some of them are still being, being looked at for implementation. We have, for example, an emergency economic intervention bill where we identify that some of the things we need to do in the immediate term require that we change the laws establishing those practices. For example, we have provisions asking Nigerian businesses to pay taxes, certain taxes and levies in foreign currency, which doesn't help us. The estimate we have from the central bank is about $3.5 billion a year. So you're essentially asking Nigerian businesses to go to the foreign exchange market to go and look for dollars that is scarce and use it when they find it to pay government. It doesn't increase the dollar liquidity in our economy, but it adds to the pain and pressure on the naira unnecessarily. So to be able to take away that burden, we need to amend the law. So we identify many laws like that that require urgent attention, and we put them together as one bill, which we call the Emergency Economic Intervention Bill. It's now going through the final review process, after which we will go to the National Assembly for enactment. So some of the measures or the recommendations we have in our first report includes how to improve public financial management discipline so that government is more prudent with how they manage our resources. How do we optimize value from government assets and natural resources? A data tax intelligence system, which I spoke about earlier on, data for tax to expand the tax net. We also have recommended the increase in personal relief allowance for employees. As an aftermath of fuel subsidy removal, employees who earn low income are really struggling to make ends meet because transportation has gone up, rent has gone up, food has gone up, and their salaries haven't increased proportionately. So by giving them more personal relief allowance, their taxes will then come down, and that will give them a little bit of headroom to cope. We also want to provide tax relief to employers who increase salaries of their low-income employees, who provide transport subsidy or allowance to their staff, and those who continue to hire more employees despite the difficult operating environment should also be recognized. I spoke about the option for Nigerian businesses to pay their taxes and levies in Naira. We want to remove the impediment to global employment opportunities for Nigerians in Nigeria. So today, we think that we can have over 1 million Nigerians who are working with international organizations while they're in Nigeria and they're earning their dollars. But we've identified some legal, tax, and even immigration impediments that is making that very unattractive to those multinationals and global companies to hire Nigerians in Nigeria. And they would therefore sometimes prefer to go and find someone in Kenya, someone in South Africa, or India, or Philippines. And we know we can compete very well with any country in the world. So we are removing those impediments so that Nigerians in Nigeria can have the opportunity to work within the global value chain. We've recommended the suspension of VAT on diesel, and this has been implemented, as well as tax waiver on CNG conversion, and renewable energy items. We are recommending the suspension of certain multiple taxes, particularly the ones that place some burden on poor people and small businesses, like haulage tax. You are moving goods from one place to another, all manners of taxes. You have advert tax. You're just doing one small business. You put a banner in front of your office, and some people just show up every time asking you for, money. Kiosk and shop taxes, even bicycle and wheelbarrow tax are in Nigeria. So we're just saying these things don't make sense, and those taxes should be suspended. We are currently engaging with the subnational because this is really within their purview. And so far, we are receiving positive responses from them. We want to promote export of goods as well as services and intellectual property. In fact, we think Nigeria will be more competitive in terms of services and intellectual property like the creative sector, even more than goods. Because for you to produce goods competitively, you need a lot of infrastructure, electricity, roads. Those things will not happen overnight. Whereas for services and IP, you need less of that, which means why do we focus on only goods? Goods are good, right? But also focus on services and intellectual property. We recommended for the FRS to allow taxpayers to make part payments within the tax solution, which they call Tax Promas. That has been fully implemented, as well as we recommended the waiver of penalty and interest on tax liability, and that also has been fully implemented. So we are grateful to the FRS, and they're the #1 in terms of implementing our recommendations. So the issues we are looking at include developing a national tax and fiscal policy framework. I spoke about that before. Tax harmonization, consolidating and redrafting the major tax laws. We have a new withholding tax regime that we have finalized, just waiting for the law to be passed so that we can publish it, where we're going to reduce the withholding tax rates on many business income to relieve people of the working capital burden and cash flow burden on their businesses. We're also looking at the exemption for SMEs. We don't think SMEs have the capacity, and they shouldn't be burdened with the requirements of withhold tax here and there of their transaction. We think we need to give them the breathing space just to be able to survive. Withholding tax on betting and gaming is being introduced. When you win, that's when you win, because once you win, it becomes an income that is liable to personal income tax. So taking some withholding tax from it will be a way to ensure that there's no evasion, and the rate that we put there is in the draft is actually small. I think it's about 5%. We want to revamp the tax agent function. So tax consultants, some of them do excellent jobs. Some of them are corrupting the system. So they produce accounts with various numbers. The one that goes to the bank is different from the one that goes to the management and the one that goes to the tax authority. We want to promote competence and ethics, because we can't have the country of our dream if in our own little space we're not doing the right thing, because these things add up. So we're going to be working with the professional bodies, ICANN, CITN, Nigerian Bar Association, and ANAN in particular on this issue. VAT fiscalization and electronic invoicing, I spoke about that. The FRS will be transformed from Federal Revenue Service to Nigerian Revenue Service. We introduced the Office of the Tax Ombudsman, and we want to recreate the Joint Tax Board so it can play a national role of coordinating issues around tax and fiscal matters, so that its role will be more than just advisory. We want to introduce a whistleblowing framework to curb corruption in tax administration. If somebody asks you for a bribe and there's a way you can whistleblow, that will help reduce the incidence of corruption in revenue administration. We're working on, harmonized tax code for subnational and also the tax amnesty scheme. So what will success look like? Overall, we are looking at getting our country to a point where we collect better. What do we mean by that? You design the tax system so that the burden of tax does not continue to rest disproportionately on the people at the bottom of the ladder. That's what we have now. We are literally just taxing poverty. We need to make sure that our incentives make sense. We need to leverage on technology and big data. And we need to modernize what we do, from customs, single window, to revenue authorities and even government agencies. We need to budget better by adopting zero-based budget. We think that we should reprioritize government spending so that we focus more on the things that will address the basic needs of our people so they can be out of multidimensional poverty. Remember those things around health, education, living standard, work and security should be the priority of government at all levels. And we think that we should reclassify our budgeting. Instead of just saying something is capital and then we're using that to buy cars and buy, laptops and TVs and desktop. I'm not saying whether those things are not necessary, depending on how you look at it. But then we should focus on infrastructure, because when you build a head office for a government agency or you buy cars, those things don't stimulate economic activities. But when you build roads, you provide electricity. So those infrastructure that stimulate economic activities should have a separate heading, infrastructure, in the budget. And then we should have a heading for human capital development, just focusing on education and health. And then the rest of it can now be your recurrence and debt service. So that way we are measuring things that are most impactful and important to our people. Number 3 is to spend better by tackling corruption, improving transparency, and ensuring that you give taxpayers value for the monies that they have paid, not that every time you open the newspaper or you listen to radio or TV, you see that money has been stolen here, it's been stolen there. That's not helping us as a people. We need to just improve, including enhancing our public procurement effectiveness. We need to manage better by adopting technology for expenditure management, ensuring that we comply with the rule of law, including benchmarks that are indicated in the law, and also make sure that we have a self-correcting system that will flag it when something is going wrong, rather than waiting for, after the damage has been done, we're running up and down. And sometimes, like we've seen from, former president, late president, Sani Abacha, you can spend another 20 years trying to recover the money. Whereas if that money had been used at the right time appropriately, it could have meant that there's development in Nigeria today more than we have. Then we need to report better, transparently. We need to be accountable. We need to have, internal controls that are very strong with proper audits. Not that government will now do audit of a company, a government MDA, 7 years after the deed has been done. So you're telling us about audited financial statement for 2017 in 2023. How does that help anyone? Why don't we do audits like the private sector? 3 months after year end, you publish the account. So if you have questions, we can then hold you to account before the monies even disappear. And there has to be consequence management for when people do the wrong thing. Otherwise, people will have the incentive to do whatever is convenient for them. And that most likely will not be in the interest of the larger society. So essentially, success means we have an economy where the environment is conducive and investment friendly, where the laws, where the policies are purposeful, and where the legislation is simple and dynamic, and the governance is people-centered and forward-looking, not that we're always reacting every time. That's how to connect the dots. So I will call the moderator now, Siri, to help us go through some of the questions we have from our participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I think this was a very, very useful and insightful session. And there are indeed a lot of questions. I'll try as much as possible to categorize them depending on the main issues that have been raised. So the first question we're seeing is around multiplicity of taxes. I think the first 3 questions, which I'll read out. There are multiple tax regimes in various sectors. How do you intend to ensure the different levels of government only collect the tax or regulate what they are empowered by law to do? The second question is still on multiple taxes, and it's relating to small businesses. It's a welcome idea that multiple taxes will be suspended, but how will this affect the IGR of local government, considering that these taxes form the major sources of most LG's IGR? Maybe I'll just pause there so you can take those 2.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Yes, indeed. We are working with the states. One thing we did was to go to the National Economic Council, presented our work to them, and we requested that they should adopt us as their committee as well, which they did. And that's because of the recognition that we cannot make much progress if we don't have the state and local governments supporting the work we're doing. So we are confident that we can demonstrate to them that they will actually generate more revenue by having fewer taxes, not more, like we have now. And also, therefore, for the local government as well, if local government today have over 20 levies and taxes that they collect, and based on the report by the MBS, they couldn't even collect 50 billion naira nationwide in 2022. So what's the point? Maybe you just need one tax and you collect more than you're collecting now. So we think their revenue will not be negatively impacted. In fact, it will be positively impacted. And like I said before, people will pay less and government will collect more because we're focusing on efficiency. We want to outlaw cash payments so that you don't have to somebody stopping you. Very crude way and very archaic way of collecting taxes. They stop you, they remove your side mirror, they take your wares if you're selling something and you start chasing yourself. Nobody does that in the 21st century. We want to professionalize all these things. You can pay your taxes, via USSD, multi-channel, or your bank transfer, payment card, and you get your receipts come to your phone. Even if you lose that message, you can retrieve it by doing something. So we believe that way to help not only SMEs, it will help everyone. Local government will benefit, the people will benefit, states will benefit, and federal government will benefit. So this is a classical win-win outcome that we expect.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think the social angle as well is something not to be overlooked, seeing that a lot of touts are used to collect these taxes by the LGs, and it's more so to sustain themselves, I would say, especially in a very unfair system. So the question here is, how do you handle the nuisance that may be caused by the touts all over the country under the guise of rate collection?
Yeah, excellent question. And you're right, Esiri. So we do think that those boys and those men that you see, we call them area boys in some parts of the country. Sometimes they are wielding sticks here and there. We think that they are themselves victims of the system, and therefore we're not looking at an approach where you arrest them and go and put them in jail, or you create another crisis for the people. We want to find a way to incorporate them. And that could easily be to train them, give them uniform, pay them decent salary. So they'll be the ones asking you to show your mobile phone that you have paid, right? And by the time you even train them, they have useful skills. Many of them will just move on from those jobs themselves and find something else more meaningful to do. So the idea being to bring everybody on board rather than trying to fight ourselves. So we think that once we are engaging now with the powers that be, from federal government, from governors, local government, once we get them to align, then we'll have those engagement with, the people on the ground that people see and therefore get the buy-in. We think that there's no single Nigerian who does not want Nigeria to do well. So it's about how you communicate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I think the next question is on the blockchain policy. And it says here, in May 2023, the Buhari-led government signed the approval of the National Blockchain Policy of Nigeria. Is there any consideration for blockchain and cryptocurrency tax policy from your committee?
Interesting. So for us, our approach is that allow every economic activity to thrive before you start thinking about, taxing here and there. About 2 years ago or thereabouts, the Finance Act introduced a capital gain tax on cryptocurrency. Government hasn't been able to implement it because the same government at the time did not even allow banks to be involved in anything to do with crypto. So we did not regulate the exchanges, we did not regulate the miners, and so there's no information, which has now been addressed. The CBN now has a new regulation about what banks can do, essentially permitting people to spend their money if they want to buy crypto. So I think that's the first step, but we want to be able to latch on to a more broader national strategy around blockchain, which is also what powers crypto. So once you're clear about what you want to do as a country, you allow those economic activities to go on, and then as a consequence, if you make money in the process, why not? Generally, you should not be exempted from tax just because you make your money from crypto, while someone else who is a trader or a farmer or a mechanic that is working hard and sweating is paying tax, So essentially, the tax will come at the right time, and also ensuring that you're not taxing people who are just struggling to make. Maybe they just bought crypto of $50 and they make $5. You're chasing them to pay tax. We think that you should have threshold to protect, small investors and forest people.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so this question is on the new industries such as renewable energy. And it's the person asks, what's the plan of the committee as it relates to their VAT obligations in these new industries?
Yeah, so we're looking at new industries and startups. There's a Startup Act, which we're also looking at to expand because it tends to focus more on the digital economy, which is good, but other sectors are also important. So we will support startups. We want Nigeria to be the startup capital for Africa. So to that extent, the tax policies will make sense. But in terms of the VAT for renewable energy sector, specifically as in that question, we've already recommended waiver of VAT, and that's because we remove first subsidy, energy cost has gone up, we are promoting renewable energy, why then impose taxes on it? So duties and VAT should not be a burden. So I believe that is being implemented, but again, if you have any particular issues where policy is one thing, and what you find on ground in terms of implementation is a different thing. So do please flag that for us to follow up and address.
Yeah, I think an easy one is probably around the solar panels where the batteries continue to be taxed at the ports, but the panels themselves are not taxed, but then the batteries contribute a significant value to the entirety of those equipment.
Yes, we're having those engagement with the customs service. And once we identify the specifics, then it will be easy for us to address them. Sometimes the reason why you have this divergence between policy intentions and implementation is because those regulators will tell you about the abuse, where people will then bring all manner of things and say they are battery for renewable, even though they are not batteries for renewable. But again, I think the solution is not complicated. Once you have HS code, some of these things can even be done without human intervention. And then you focus on addressing the abuse rather than punishing everybody just because a few people were doing the wrong thing. So I do agree with you. We'll take that up with the Nigerian Customs Service.
Okay, thank you so much, Charlie. This question it's more a suggestion, but I think maybe something that you can also feedback on. I want to suggest the committee works more on a central database that will enable all relevant tax authorities to assess HNIs appropriately, because some of them will have businesses in some states and only declare the ones they have in the states they reside, instead of declaring the global income. Thank you.
Yes, so we do think that some high net worth individuals are trying their best to pay the right amount of tax, but a good number of them are not paying correctly. So therefore, but to be honest, it's not just about the high net worth individuals. If you go all the way down, you remember the study we conducted, even the middle class, even some people that are at the bottom of the ladder. So vast majority of Nigerians are not paying their taxes correctly. Mm-hmm. That's partly due to the tax system itself not being properly designed, which is what we are addressing now. But once we figure that out and we decide what is right, then everybody has to do the right thing. Whether you're a high net worth individual, whether you're a middle class, or whether you're a business owner. And that way, by using intelligence, whether you operate in 2 states or in 10 states, whether you even operate abroad, you have a business in Nigeria, you have operations abroad, or you don't even live in Nigeria, but your business is here, you pay the right amount of tax because the data will show what you need to do. And by the way, Nigeria is a signatory to International Exchange of Information with over 100 countries, and we are receiving data from those countries. If you are a resident in Nigeria and you suddenly have a $2 million assets in Dubai or the US or Canada or the UK, and you haven't declared that for tax in Nigeria, you have questions to answer. So this is the way we are looking at it to address making sure that people pay the right amount of tax.
Yeah, okay. And closely related to that is this question on micro businesses. How do we encourage them to incorporate their businesses so the taxes and levies they pay go to the right channels rather than unregulated levy collectors? How would they be taxed accurately without killing the business? This, again, is related to the informal economy just being so huge. And we continue to say that they sustain the economy, but then maybe there's no fair share of tax coming from there. And it causes a lot of companies to still hide under the radar, if, they're not paying the right taxes. So I guess this is what's causing this question. Was an
Yeah, great
interesting.
question, actually. Great question. Yeah. So we think that the strategy that Nigeria has for informal sector is not working, it's counterproductive. And that's because many times you hear even governors will say, top people in government will say, our money is in the informal sector. There's no data to support that. There's no country in the world where government makes its money from the informal sector. So we think that 99% of the informal sector in Nigeria should actually be exempted from all taxes. So if you target only the top 1% of the informal sector, based on available data, you're talking about around 4 million businesses. Even people that are paying the taxes today in Nigeria combined as businesses are not up to that. So we are working on a strategy for the informal sector for Nigeria to adopt. And having said that, what we also have today is that when you come to the formal system, it's almost like you're asking for trouble. So everything just goes up from your taxes to the regulation to the scrutiny. So why would anybody want to do that if they just want the peace of mind running their business? So we, as a country, with our policies and how we implement them, we have to make formalization attractive so that there's a pull factor, right? And then everything can be taken for granted where people then aspire to register with CAC, incorporate, and do things right, which is also good for them that when they formalize, they're able to then access so many things, including, partnership opportunities, even with people abroad. You can have international partners, you can access credit facilities, you can grow your business. So that is the way we are looking at it. We should not tax any startup such that they cannot continue in business. We see the data showing that a high percentage of startups don't even survive up to the third year in business. So we have to improve those statistics by doing the right thing.
Okay, great one. And this is just a nice way to get on the next question, which says, is the committee looking at restructuring the FIRS and perhaps other taxing authorities in terms of focusing in reducing the duplication of tax reviews and audits? For instance, to have a desk review, tax monitoring, tax audits, and on one assessment year is not efficient and increases the cost of doing business?
Yes, the answer is yes. So in fact, the work is already almost 100% completed now. So we've sat down with the FRS leadership to look at how to reorganize. So there's a new organization structure for them with the focus on the taxpayers. So before it was always what was convenient for the tax authority, bring this here, go there. So that is now being implemented and people will begin to see the impact very soon. One of the major issues was how can we harmonize tax audits? Why do you have debt review, monitoring, tax audit, investigation, special investigation? Nobody set up their business to be attending to tax authority. It's not good for the people. Even the government themselves don't even have the capacity to be doing that. So we do understand the pain and we are tackling that head on.
Okay, great stuff. So this is on transparency and accountability. And maybe I'll just take these two questions. What's the plan to handling transparency and accountability of revenue received? And then the second question says, I just wanted to know if the committee is looking at the tax expenditures, which is taking up the revenue that should be coming into government's purse.
Yeah, brilliant. So on the first one, yes, that national tax perception study shows that the Nigerian people don't really trust government and they don't feel like they get proper value for the taxes they pay. So we're working on a spending framework where we are and it's going to be online. So where we're going to be asking government, federal, state, and local government to prioritize what's important to the people and be transparent in how they spend our money. So the savings from fuel subsidy removal, naira flotation, are essentially sacrifices of the Nigerian people. That's huge amounts of savings is being transferred from the people to the government. So government should not waste the money. You should spend it back to take care of the people. That's the whole essence of the social contract as we know it. So we hope that that framework will be able to help us to improve in that area. So the second one is on tax expenditure for the benefits of everyone. This is just tax incentives and waivers. We're looking at that holistically. Today, we spend an average of about 6 trillion per annum on various waivers, tax break, incentives. Incentives are not bad, but you have to make sure that they're not creating distortion to the economy and that they're not for every 1 naira of incentive you give, the benefit to the society must be more than 1 naira. So we're looking at everything from pioneer status to free zone arrangements to allowances and reliefs and credit, import duty waivers. So we're looking at all of that. Our expectation is that when we are done, that number will come down because we would have cut out the wasteful spending and the ones that create distortion, but there'll still be a good number in terms of naira amount of tax incentive that we need to keep because they are good for our people, like exemption on basic food item, on medical, on education, as well as exemption for small businesses.
Okay, great. This question is on the stability and predictability of our tax laws. I thought that the introduction of the Finance Act was, a welcome one, but for this individual, it's becoming arduous for them. So it says, how will the committee ensure that, we minimize the changes through frequent annual finance acts?
Yeah, so we have received that feedback from many of our stakeholders. They're concerned that we just bring too much uncertainty. Before they wake up, we say there's a new finance act changing everything. Sometimes when they're doing their investment plans, they're not aware of these things, and then we introduce them midway. So because of that, we have decided that we will not continue with the annual finance act. So there is no plan to introduce finance act for 2024. Instead of that, what we're planning to do is the things we need to amend, we're doing that through the Emergency Economic Intervention Bill. And then more fundamentally, we are rewriting the laws. So because the laws are very old, that's why you need to keep amending them. But if you rewrite them and you engage broadly with stakeholders to make sure that it's reflective of what we all want, then we think that for the next few years, there'll be no need to amend. So amendments will then become less frequent and by extension, reduce the uncertainties that come with it. So I do agree with the person that has that question.
Yeah, very great perspective. This question, Tyro, is on government-owned entities. What's the committee doing to block the revenue leakages from the government-owned entities?
Yes, so we think that government-owned entities should not even be collecting revenue. They should just focus on their business. And then the organization that has been set up for revenue collection should collect on their behalf. So in many countries, even social security contribution like your pension is even collected by the revenue authority like HMRC in the UK. So the plan is if you automate collections, if you harmonize them and you ensure transparency in what you need to pay and what has been collected, you cut out all those waste, inefficiency, and in some cases, corruption that may be in that process.
Okay, great. This question talks about Nigeria not being bereft of beautiful ideas, but my fear is the implementation. What is the plan for strict implementation?
Yes, fair point. So this is something we recognize from the very beginning, and therefore, in setting up our committee, Mr. President said, I'm not just looking for reports, I'm looking for implementation. And that's why we didn't wait until the end of our committee to submit reports. We are submitting reports as we go along. We discuss them, and then we support government to implement while we pick on new ideas. So we think that will give, like I said, we already have about 5 or 6 of our recommendations that have been implemented already. So that's how we're going to continue for the life of the committee's mandate. So we are hopeful, not that we're hopeful, we know that the implementation rate for our recommendation will be much higher than we have seen in the past. And we are hopeful that it will be 100%, even though I have to say that's quite ambitious, but that's our target.
Yeah, wish you all the best. Okay. This question says, like, does coming up with a new national tax policy entail review of the existing national tax policy and bringing it in line with global best practice, or are we abandoning the existing national tax policy and coming up with an entire rewrite?
Yeah, so I'll say it's maybe somewhere in the middle. So we're not abandoning it. So we're starting with what we currently have and say, what do we need to improve? And then what should we add? Like I said earlier on, we want to add policy around spending, just in case there's a governor somewhere who doesn't understand that they need to prioritize health, education, and the living standard, and also even borrowing. Should you go and borrow so you can pay salaries or do foreign travels? So those are the things we are adding. So when we are done, it will be an enhanced version of what we have now without discarding everything we currently have, because it will be wrong to say that everything we have now is not good enough. It's actually that it is good, but it could be better. And that's what we are trying to do.
Okay, great. So what does the committee see as its role in coming up with fiscal, low-interest funding alternatives to the intervention funds which the CBN has signaled will be discontinued?
Yes. So we have certain activities that are really critical to the economy, like agriculture, like manufacturing. And you cannot ask them to go and borrow at 26, 30%. How will they make money? It will be almost impossible. And even if they make money, they have to pass the cost to the rest of us. And that will fuel inflation and poverty. So we think that it is right. And the CBN has done the right thing to say it's not their job to start doing development finance. Is the job of the fiscal authority. So we're going to be working with them. We're already discussing with stakeholders on possible ways of making sure we can fund businesses, Greek manufacturing with single digit interest rates. So that's done anywhere in the world, by the way. So we want to find more decent way, a sustainable way of doing it, because even the CBN doesn't even have the skills and the capacity to administer it. That's why many of the intervention funds haven't been as successful. So it will be now something that will be handled mostly by the fiscal authorities with development institutions.
Okay, thank you, Carol. I'll just go straight to the sustainability related questions, especially on the back of COP28. It's interesting that there are questions like this here. So is there a plan to introduce, about two of them I'll ask at the same time, is there a plan to introduce carbon tax breaks for organizations who actively promote ESG? And then secondly, from the social lens, what are you doing to address women's needs and priorities within the tax system? For instance, recruitment of women for tax administration, improving access to technology, and tax information for women in the informal sector, childcare, etc.
Awesome. Yeah, so I like that question, because when you talk about equity, it's not just about, small businesses, large businesses, federal government and state government. It's also about gender. And historically, society has been put together by men. I think that's the way to put it, such that it favors them to the disadvantage of women. And that's from job opportunities to political appointments or political roles, to even the burden of family care, right? So now that we are all waking up to that realization, we need to fix it, and we need to fix it urgently. We cannot allow the tax system to then compound an already unfavorable situation we have for women. So therefore, our policies take into account, and that's also even the composition of our team is very intentional, that the members of our committee and the people who lead our subcommittees, we have a good blend of men and women across different walks of life. So that same thing is what we're going to introduce into the tax system, whether it's to do with opportunities to be a tax officer or lead the tax authority, or women businesses, how they are being taxed without any bias, and also to even recognize sometimes the peculiarities of what women go through, such that if there are need for certain women-specific incentives or tax breaks, to recognize the extra burden that they carry in terms of care in particular, we're open to all of that. This is also one of the areas that we discussed in a recent engagement with the United Nations Development Program on equity for women. So happy that someone is addressing the issue as well. And so the first question around ESG carbon credits, we think that we should latch on to a more strategic plan for Nigeria. So Nigeria's ambition or promise or commitment is net zero by 2063, and now we're 2023. So between now and that time, what should we be doing, and how does fiscal policy and tax come into play? We don't want to jump ahead of ourselves and then put the cart before the horse. We think what we should do is make sure there's a comprehensive plan, and then what are the gaps that tax can fill, whether it should be carbon credits, whether it should be carbon tax, even the border adjustments, given the African Continental Free Trade Area. We're looking at all of that to make sure that at the end of the day, we have what is right for our people. This was the major reason why the some green taxes that were introduced by the former the administration of the former president Buhari close to the end of their term, like single-use plastic tax and the tax on some vehicles, were suspended because we feel like we shouldn't start with imposing taxes, but look at a comprehensive plan for the country.
Okay, great. So maybe I'll just ask these 3 questions because they're all related to state administration. In a situation where each state has different taxpayer identification number, what are you doing to harmonize them? And then the second one's asking, what is the position of the committee on bribes collected by some tax officers from taxpayers? And then the third is asking about refunds from the government becoming a nightmare. This has a negative impact on investment. What's the committee doing about this? So refunds, tax IDs, and then bribery in the system.
Yeah, excellent question. So so the way we have it today is you have tax identification for, like, I'm resident in Lagos. I have a number for Lagos State Internal Revenue Service. I have another one for the Joint Tax Board. I have a company and then it's registered with FRS. You don't need all those fragmented identities. They just make things difficult. The same way we also have driver license, voters card, NIN. We just need to start harmonizing things. That's how every country will manage themselves. Not only just because of the fiscal system and the economy in terms of businesses, but also for the insecurity. So we are already having that conversation. Once we are done, our plan is to have NIN as the anchor or primary identification for individuals. And then for businesses, it will be their RC number with the Corporate Affairs Commission. So that way, everything else rests on those primary identification. That will help us to gain some harmony rather than fragmentation that we have. In terms of bribes, yes, the study that has been conducted, in fact, says that about 2/3 of Nigerian adults said they were asked to pay a bribe in the process of wanting to pay their taxes. It's already hard to pay tax. Why should I have to pay a bribe in the process of paying my taxes? So this is one of the reasons why we're trying to promote self-service so that you can do things on your own without speaking to anyone. Get your tax clearance certificate online. In fact, we think that we don't even need tax clearance certificates. You can pay your taxes, you can file your returns easily just from the comfort of your home or office. That will cut out, those issues. And then whatever is left of that, we are introducing a whistleblowing framework so that people have a way to report when they don't like what they're seeing. So everybody then becomes the police of the system, and the chances that this will be successful is much higher than if you're just waiting for EFCC and some FRS officers or state internal revenue officers to be the one enforcing compliance. Because sometimes you may find some of these officers themselves are compromised. So, and the last one around refund, yes. To build trust in the system, you must be able to pay refund for excess taxes or whatever mistakes or errors the taxpayer has made. There are countries like the Nordic countries where people actually intentionally overpay their taxes because they know government will return it, sometimes with some interest. But in Nigeria, even if you genuinely, or sometimes because of the way the system has been designed, like input, output, VAT interplay, right? Government says deduct his output from source, but I have my input. Just to go and claim that refund, they will tell you special audit, go and bring payroll, go and bring invoices, print out your ledgers. You can be on this for years, and sometimes when you're done, they just find out, they just cook up some liabilities elsewhere that you even regret applying for the refund in the first place. We want to address that. And the other thing we want to do is that because money is fungible, if you have excess payments in VAT, why am I asking you to bring money to come and pay withholding tax, to come and pay CIC? So I should be able to move my money around, and we have the technology today, as we speak, within our financial system to even make that happen. Once we have the legal framework in place and the political will to implement it.
Yeah, great. I think those ideas are really brilliant. Now, this question is talking about removing impediments to global employment opportunities for Nigerians in Nigeria. How will government create incentives to attract global companies to employ locally and contribute to solving the employment and FX problems in Nigeria?
Yeah, so we think that our people, particularly our young people, have the skills that can compete internationally. Our time zone is favorable to most countries in the world. Our accent is actually good, at least much better than the Indians. And the Indians made over $200 billion from business process outsourcing. Philippines made $35 billion. So let's even start with making $10 billion in Nigeria. With 1 million people, maybe just even earning $1,000 a month. That's a lot of income that will come to those people. Inflow of FX that will help us stabilize the value of the naira and therefore moderate inflation for everyone. And then some revenue will go to government because it is taxable income. So what we have done is we've identified those impediments where, for example, by employing Nigerians in Nigeria, and you're an American company or a company in Europe, we then bring that company itself to our tax net and say you must file returns, you've created a permanent establishment, you should pay tax. They won't come because there are other countries where they will do the same thing without anybody stressing their lives. So we've identified those things. We put them in the Emergency Economic Intervention Bill. Once that law is passed, we'll then promote it in terms of awareness, implementation. We're going to speak to those multinationals. And we think that will just open up significant opportunities for our people, particularly our youth, to gain the employment within the global value chain. There are a good number of Nigerians who don't want to leave Nigeria. They rather be here and be successful rather than being desperate to go elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Still on, businesses staying back. This is saying, can the committee look into the current draconian minimum tax rate of 0.5% on turnover? This is negatively affecting businesses and it's like paying tax out of capital.
And I agree 100%. So I can tell you right away, in our draft law, because I told you we are rewriting the law, this will go away completely. We think that asking people to pay minimum tax when they haven't made a profit, or they've made just little profit, and you say, oh no, but I expect you to pay at least this amount of tax. How does that even make sense? You're asking them to use their capital to pay government. That's the fastest way to kill any company. So that's going to go. And we don't want to tax capital. We don't want to tax investments.
Great. This is welcome news. Okay, so these are 3 questions I'll ask at the same time. And it's all about reliefs. One is asking, what relief can be made available to those who give for philanthropic causes? Another is asking for doctors getting tax-free call duty allowance so that more doctors can stay back in the country. For persons with disability that can't do anything at all, how can we help them?
Excellent. So, yeah, so in some countries, if you donate to charity, maybe to take care of motherless kids, promote education of girls, and all of those nice things that government should be doing, by the way, but they're not doing, you get a tax deduction for doing those social goods. We don't have that in Nigeria. So we are rewriting the personal income tax law. And this is one of the things we are debating. But just to be clear, We haven't landed on it because we need to consult broadly, and these things can also be easily abused. But in principle, I do agree that if you donate to do what government should be doing, then we should allow you to even get some tax relief in the process. Doctors and beauty call allowance, can it be tax-free? The reality is that, the work doctors do is extremely important, but also is the work of teachers. It's also the work of even, food vendors. Without food, we will not be alive. Without education, we will not grow. Without healthcare, we may die young. So there's so many people who are doing very important things to the economy. We don't want to start isolating any particular sector or particular group of people for incentive, because how do you then explain it that teachers are not getting, the same relief, or even our armed forces who put their lives at stake to protect us? What we think is more critical is to ensure that everybody earns the living wage. And I think Mr. President has mentioned this a couple of times, not just minimum wage, but enough to help you meet your basic needs after taking into account whatever taxes you need to pay, and to ensure that the threshold for exemption is sensible. So you should not be taxing someone who is earning 35,000 naira per month because they are living in poverty. That's taxing poverty. If we raise the threshold for exemption high enough so that your income is protected to basic need, then it will not be an issue whether a duty call allowance is being taxed or not. And by the way, any allowance that you earn that is meant to cover your out-of-pocket expenses, that should also be protected. It shouldn't be taxed. So that's the direction in which we're going. When we are done with it, not only would it benefit doctors, it would also benefit other professionals and even people with different vocations. In terms of people with disability, so we had a session with people with disability, and one of the most exciting sessions we had. So for those who attended, we also received feedback from them. There are associations, sending submissions to us for consideration. And I met one of them, who stopped me, and he was on a wheelchair. And then showed me his phone and said, "Are you, Taiwo Idile? Thank you for remembering us." So for us, it's carrying everybody along. And many people will not know that based on available data, we have, as of 2020, about 27 million Nigerians living with disability of one form or the other. And what that means is you're just saying about close to 1 in 8 Nigerians, or over 12-13%. So that's a huge number. It's even more than the population of Cameroon or even Liberia and Sierra Leone combined. If you combine Liberia and Sierra Leone, it's not even up to 20 million. So this is huge, and we have to always take into account their interests as well. They're not often at the table when we're making policies, but our policies must be inclusive. So we're looking at how do you implement existing policies, possible incentives or tax break for employers to consider them with equal opportunities. Many of them are actually not asking you for any favor. They're just saying, don't shut the door at us. Give us the opportunity to compete with everyone else. So that's what we will do.
Yeah, I think that aspect of inclusive growth is really important, and it's a great takeaway even for me, just calling out teachers as well, who honestly run the economy through the education that they give to us, but definitely it feels like they don't get the better end of the stick most times, even in terms of retirement contributions and all that. So I think if we can really make propositions and implement along those lines, that would be fantastic for the nation. So there are a lot of questions here around social security and even education as well. So I just ask them together. One is on education. How can you address some indiscriminate fees charged by Nigerian higher institutions like acceptance fee, certification fee? This is making education difficult to young Nigerians. And the second is saying, do you have plans for social security and safety nets for the poorest of the poor? While the third, again, on the topic of inclusivity, is asking about Nigerians in this diaspora. What incentives will you be offering to entice this category of people?
Thank you very much. Very good questions. So the first one, yes, so I pay the school fees of quite a good number of people. And every time I kept asking myself, why is it that you have to charge me so much for acceptance fee? Another one for certification. When you want to go and collect your statements, result slip, there's a charge for that. There's a charge for department, there's one for SUG. By the time you add it up, you easily sometimes cross 400,000. And even though we say education is meant to be free and affordable, the vast majority of the Nigerian household and families can't afford this amount. We know that the universities are trying to raise funds internally to run their operations, but that can be at the expense of families that are struggling. While this is not directly a tax issue or fiscal matter, we think it's important to beam a searchlight on it. And the way we are looking at it is working with the government around the student loan scheme. If we can set that up properly and it's up and running, then the pressure on universities to try and generate revenue from other sources will come down, because it will mean that they can charge the right amount of fees for tuition. And those who can afford it will pay, those who cannot afford it will get the loans. And then, they just need to get to a point where everything is harmonized. If it's tuition fee, just say tuition fee. Don't start calling different. They even, universities and polytechnics and other tertiary institutions where they sell handouts and they are marks. You don't get the handouts, you lose 20 marks. That's not fair to the people. So we will work with them on how to, improve on that. On social security for the poorest people, yes, at the end of the day, if you put up a social security system to protect the poor, it's good for society, but some people have to pay for it. The government will not print money to take care of that. That will mean that the working class will contribute to protect those who are vulnerable and unemployed. We have a few things currently around that you can call social security. Maybe the idea will be, how do you make it more effective and then expand it over time? And the last one is around Nigerians in the diaspora. So the intention here is not to ask Nigerians in the diaspora to start paying taxes to Nigeria on their foreign income. They're already paying taxes where they are. Most of the places where they are, the tax rates are very high, as high as 40, in some cases even 50%. So, and they're already doing a lot by sending money to their families and relatives and friends in Nigeria, which the World Bank estimated was about $20 billion in 2022. So rather, our focus with the Nigerians in the diaspora is, what can we learn from them? And how can they help us? Because even when you leave Nigeria, Nigeria doesn't leave you. So it's in your own interest that Nigeria is doing well. It can also improve the respect you get even when you go abroad. When home is good, you're respected outside. If it's not so good, everybody's looking at you like you're a refugee rather than an expatriate.
Yeah.
So yeah, we receive very positive feedback and responses from the Nigerians in the diaspora when we had a session with them. Many of them said, wow, they were reluctant to come for the meeting, but they were glad they did. So we're going to just build on that going forward.
Well done, Tyrell. So there are three questions I'd still like to ask. Two of them I think you probably already addressed. I'll read them out the same, but then we'd focus on the last question. So how does the Presidential Committee intend to capture the informal sector into the tax net? You've talked about this already. In the light of the growing importance of sustainability, I'm curious to know if the committee has any plans to enhance sustainability practices in Nigeria. I think you kind of gleaned on sustainability, but if you'd like to still shed more light, that would be fine. But this is the last question, and the one that hasn't been addressed. Does your scope include land ownership or registration simplification? There is a lot of capital to unlock there.
Yes. Very, very good questions. So on the informal sector, yes, what we're trying to do is not just to bring all of them into the tax net, chase them on the road and collect 500 naira, 1,000. So there are people who pay, like the Okada riders. They not only pay tax every day, they pay multiple taxes every single day. So you cross one local government and that person collects from you. We think that we need a strategy for the informal sector that start by saying, what can we do to help you grow? And then as a consequence, when you grow, we then focus on maybe the top 1%, top 2% to pay taxes. I always think that the bottom 99, 98% needs to be protected completely from tax burden. On sustainability, in addition to what I said before, I think we are looking at a carrot approach more than stick. So instead of imposing taxes on anything that moves in a country where you need all the development and investment you can get, why don't you adopt a carrot approach where you incentivize people for doing the right thing? And those could be in form of, either carbon credit or some encouraging people to do whatever benefits the economy. If you help us, reduce CO2 in the environment, and we have a scheme where you can then sell it to those who need those credits to do whatever they're doing, it becomes viable. And ultimately, instead of imposing taxes on single-use plastic, maybe you need to incentivize people who produce biodegradable packaging materials. Instead of taxing producers of bottled drink, the PET bottles, maybe what you need to do is to make sure that you incentivize them so they collect those bottles and recycle them. And we can use that to even solve other problems that we're facing. So those creative ways of solving our problems, so we don't keep thinking like and acting like the military regime, everything is just punish people, that doesn't work in a modern society. On land ownership registration, yes, this is a major one for us. It's one of our top recommendations to the sub-national government. I'm going around now to visit them. And we're saying to them, why don't you just simplify land registration? So I should go online and know what is step 1, step 2, step 3, and how much I need to pay, and how long it will take me to complete it. South Africa says, within 17 days, you complete land registration. Rwanda is 7 days and they are still not happy. They are now introducing what they call no trip, no paper. So you won't have to visit government and you won't need to print a single paper, and they want to do it within 3 to 5 days. And that's Rwanda, a small country. Why can't we do it in Nigeria? So make it easy for people to register their property. That would also enable them to have collateral to access credit. Then mandate development in urban area. You cannot just buy the land and keep it and be speculating. The law empowers the governor to say, if you don't develop within a period of time, I'll take it from you. What will happen is you either develop it or you sell it to someone who wants to develop. Either way, you create economic activities, which is good for the people, for employment, for GDP growth, and for revenue will then come to the government by extension. We also have an idea around urban redevelopment. So you have some areas where you have estates that were built in the 70s. They are bungalows, they are not modern, some of them are dirty. And there are private sector people that will say, you know what, I'll redevelop this place. So instead of bungalows, they do some high rise, they give you free modern flats. And then they use the remaining space to build the one they will sell to recover their money. You can have access to the train because there's a station there. You can have biodegradable way of managing waste, which is environmentally friendly. You just have a modern society, just by initiative. Government doesn't even need to spend €1 to get that done. So those are some of the ideas we're sharing now with the state. And so far, so good. They are receptive to those ideas.
Thank you so much, Taiwo, for taking our time to attend to all these questions, which a lot of clarity as well. And that brings us to the end of the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esiri. So I will just close the session now. Now that our stakeholders have asked us a lot of questions, we're going to ask them a few favors. One is, please follow us and stay informed with the work that we do. If you look to the right of the screen, you see we have a dedicated website, fiscalreforms.ng. We have a dedicated email, inquiries@fiscalreforms.ng. We have a dedicated WhatsApp number. Please don't call, just send messages, because the person handling it part time may not have the skills to answer your question, but they can redirect it. If you are comfortable with social media, you find us on LinkedIn, on X, formerly Twitter. You find us on Instagram, Facebook, and we have a dedicated YouTube channel. In all these platforms, Fiscal Reforms NG will do the magic. Only on LinkedIn would you have to worry about Fiscal Reforms Nigeria. Ask questions and seek clarification where necessary. We're here to work for you. This is a service to our country. develop your knowledge and interest and understanding of fiscal matters. So there's nothing that is more harmful than ignorance, especially in this world today where information is freely available. So don't pay that price of making mistake when you can easily acquire the knowledge. Just take interest. Give us feedback and share your perspectives and recommendations. Inform and engage others within your network and circle of influence. So if you have attended this stakeholder forum, or you watch this on YouTube or on the internet, share it with a friend, share it with a family, someone that needs to know, that needs to hear about it. And then we welcome and look forward to further engagement as we progress with our work. So this is not the end of our consultation, it's the beginning. We even plan to have town hall meetings. Some of them will be physical, so we can, speak to ourselves honestly as Nigerians and agree on the way forward. Finally, we plan to administer some surveys. When you do consultation like this, even the view of one person will make it to your list of to-do list. Before you start making policies that affect only 2 or 3 people, you need to then conduct a survey to know the extent of, how many people can relate to that problem. In other words, we will prioritize an issue that affects 40% of our stakeholders than the one that affects 2%. Like I said earlier on at the beginning of this presentation, we're looking at those top 10% interventions that will give us 90% of the impact. So watch out for our surveys and please do respond when you receive them. So I have met so many Nigerians and I'm also one of them. I haven't met a single one that says this is the Nigeria of our dream. In other words, we know that this is not where we need to be as a country. That's not where we want to be. That's not the Nigeria we want. But we also know that to get that Nigeria of our dream, we have to do a few things. And those things are better accomplished when we do them collectively. Our collective will to succeed is so strong, it cannot be overcome by any impediment. So if you agree with me that this is not the Nigeria of our dream, I say come with us on this journey to create Nigeria that we want. Like Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Esiri, for the excellent moderation, and thank you to our secretariat for hosting this program. May God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you, and this session has come to a close. Bye-bye.